And a lot of that's just like through observation of like watching my folks work like throughout their entire lives, and just like, and wondering, like, going into retirement too, and just trying to figure it out, like, what the hell are we going to do, once we're done working. They have this yard, that they love and they love working in, and they can continue doing that. But I always wonder, like, when is there a breaking point in terms of like, when is enough. Well, I guess like the paintings, they're abstract to a degree, when you're up close to them. But again, when you're backed up, like, you see everything clearly. And I think that influence was just being, at home again and being in the moment, and seeing, these things kind of happening, seeing the labor that's happening in the yard, and just seeing things kind of like begin to build, or these structures beginning to happen, whether they are like intentional structures or structures that just like are just for functionality, like stacking the wood perfectly, or raking the yard and just like making a pile, in a particular spot. It wasn't about memory anymore. It was about being in the present and just like kind of taking advantage of those moments. Since I didn't have a studio, I made the backyard my studio, to some degree. And I think I'm going to continue doing that and playing with that, and just seeing what else I can kind of like build, in terms of that, to gain more inspiration, more images to kind of play with within my work. But I also like the play between like perspective and the way we see things too. And I think that's the reason why I stick with like making these paintings expressive. I like the act of them like breaking apart, and you're seeing these new like layers, building up to this like picture. I always start my paintings with a gradient, and I always like, I want this gradient to like kind of reveal itself, when you're close to the work, when you're looking at it at the surface. I bring labor in a lot. The art is just like work on top of like work you already, do for a living. And I think of these like sunrises and sunsets as like it's like a never ending thing. You're constantly like just doing something like throughout the day. And I think that's where that influence came from, with like, pursuing these new paintings in such a way. This was an act that my parents did themselves, creating this grid. And so, I took influence on that, and started like making these sort of repetition compositions, these pattern compositions within the yard, and doing things in my yard that is kind of unconventional. Probably definitely not the most ideal way to like do something, or to cultivate the yard, or make it look the way you see it in like magazines, or golf course or whatever. Yeah, I attended ACC between 2006 and 2010. First one out of my family to attend a college, or pursue higher education. I love the life drawing courses at ACC. The number of models that they had come in, the different types of models, body types. It was fantastic. Many of those drawing courses I took with Doug Jakes. He kind of took me under his belt in some ways, invited me to like the student exhibitions whenever they happen. Yeah, he was a fantastic teacher. And it was really ACC that helped me further discover studio art.